I never thought a simple joke would stick in my chest the way it did that afternoon. I was standing in her kitchen, a cup of coffee in my hand when I blurted it out. If you were younger, I'd marry you. I meant it as nothing more than a throwaway line. The kind of half-nervous banter men used to mask how unsettled they really feel. But the way her eyes lingered on me, quiet, unreadable, behind those thin black glasses, made me realize I might have crossed into something I didn't fully understand. My name's James Larson. I'm 42, recently divorced, and I live back in the old neighborhood where I grew up. Life has a way of circling you back to the places you once ran from. I came home to help my mother after my father passed, thinking I'd stay a few months. 2 years later, I'm still here with a steady job at the local hardware store and a silence in my evenings that no TV or beer can fill. Across the fence in the white painted house with the flower beds that never fail to bloom, lives Clara Bennett. She's 51, blonde, composed, and always carrying herself with a kind of grace that makes you forget the years. She was married once, lost her husband to an illness years ago, and though everyone knows the story, no one really talks about it anymore. She keeps busy church on Sundays, tending to her roses, sometimes teaching art to neighborhood kids. To me, she's always been more of a fixture, like the oak tree that shadows her porch. Steady, beautiful, untouchable. That day, I had just finished helping her move a stubborn box of garden tools from her shed. She invited me in for coffee as a thank you. I should have known better. Quiet afternoons like that have a way of making a man too honest. The smell of fresh brew, the way the sun cut across her curtains, her voice asking about how my mother was holding up, it all softened me. I leaned on the counter, words spilling out without thought. And then came that line. If you were younger, I'd marry you. The silence that followed wasn't what I expected. I thought she'd laugh it off, wave a hand, make some teasing remark about my poor attempts at humor. Instead, she tilted her head, studying me like she was deciding whether I was joking or confessing something deeper. Her lips pressed together, almost forming a smile, but not quite. That stillness tightened every muscle in my back. I tried to change the subject, asked about her roses, about the weather turning. But she didn't take the bait. She just kept looking at me as if she'd heard not the joke, but the weight underneath it. I couldn't hold her gaze for long. My eyes dropped to the coffee swirling in my cup. And for the first time in years, I felt like a boy caught saying something he wasn't supposed to. The truth is, I've been lonely for a long time. Since my divorce, I've tried to convince myself that solitude is simpler, safer. But Clara Bennett, she unsettles that narrative. She doesn't do anything intentional. It's just who she is. The way she tucks her hair behind her ear when she laughs. The calmness in her movements. The depth in her eyes that hints at stories no one has earned the right to hear. She's a reminder of everything I pretend I don't need. That moment in her kitchen, when my careless words hung between us, felt like a door cracking open. Not wide enough to step through, but just enough to glimpse what might be on the other side. I found myself wondering, what if she hadn't married so young? What if I had lived a little faster or slower, and our paths had crossed at the right time? Her voice finally broke the silence, softer than I expected. Funny thing to say, James Larson. I nodded quickly, forcing a laugh, desperate to close the door. I just nudged open, but her eyes lingered, and I swear there was a flicker of something there. Curiosity maybe, or the faintest ache. When I left her house that day, the evening air felt heavier than usual. The joke I had tossed like a pebble into a pond was rippling through me. Unsettling waters I thought had long gone still. I lay awake that night, replaying it over and over. The look in her eyes, the way she didn't dismiss me, the sudden awareness that for the first time in a long time, someone had made me feel both foolish and alive. And I couldn't stop asking myself, had I just ruined a neighborly friendship, or had I stumbled into something far more dangerous? The morning after that coffee, I swore to myself I'd let it go. People say foolish things all the time. One stray line didn't have to mean anything. But the truth is, I couldn't shake it. That joke clung to me like the faint smell of her coffee on my shirt. Every time I stepped into my yard, Every time I heard the creak of her gate or caught sight of her curtains shifting, it was there. The echo of my own words and the way she hadn't laughed. Life has its way of pretending to be ordinary while something underneath changes forever. My days passed as usual. I stocked shelves at the hardware store, chatted with regulars, shared quiet dinners with my mother. But Clara Bennett's face haunted the corners of those moments. That measured look behind her glasses, the pause she let stretch too long. She had planted something in me I hadn't invited, and it grew in silence. A few days later, I saw her out by the fence. She was kneeling in the grass, pulling weeds from the flower bed. I almost turned back, but she noticed me before I could. "Morning, James Larson," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. Her voice was steady, casual. But when she stood and met my eyes, there was something careful about the way she held her smile. I mumbled a greeting and asked if she needed help. She shook her head. "I've managed this long enough on my own." Then after a pause, she added, "But company isn't unwelcome," so I stayed. I leaned on the fence, watching her tug at stubborn roots. We talked about trivial things, the weather, the stubborn raccoon that had been tipping her trash bins. I laughed at her frustration, and for a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. But then Henry came walking up the street. Henry has been around this neighborhood as long as I can remember. Broad-shouldered, the kind of man who wears his confidence like a badge. He's close to Clara Bennett's age, and everyone assumes he's been waiting for the right moment to move into her life. He glanced at me, then at her, and smirked like he knew a secret. "James Larson," he called out. "You fixing fences for Clara Bennett again? Or are you just hanging around hoping she'll bake you a pie?" Clara Bennett's face tightened. I felt my ears burn. I wanted to snap back, but Clara Bennett spoke first, her tone calm, but edged with steel. "Henry, don't you have somewhere else to be?" He laughed, gave me one last look, and walked on. I tried to brush it off, but the damage was done. Doubt slid in where laughter had been. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just some middle-aged fool lingering where I didn't belong. Later that evening, Clara Bennett knocked on my door. I opened it, surprised to see her holding a plate covered in foil. "Fresh banana bread," she said simply. My mother was thrilled, ushering her in. Clara Bennett sat at the kitchen table like she had 100 times before, but I noticed how my mother's eyes narrowed, how she seemed to watch every word between us. When my mother left the room, Clara Bennett leaned closer. Her voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Don't let Henry's words bother you. He likes to stir trouble." I nodded, but inside I was spinning. Why had she come over? Why bring bread now after days of silence? Was it kindness? Or was she answering a question I hadn't dared to ask? As she stood to leave, she touched my arm lightly. A small gesture, but enough to set fire to the air between us. "Thank you for the other day," she said, though she didn't specify what she meant. Then she was gone, the door clicking shut, leaving me with the warmth of her touch and a dozen restless thoughts. That night, lying awake, I realized something. My joke hadn't been just a joke, and her silence hadn't been silence at all. It had been consideration. The kind of pause that means someone is weighing what they feel against what they should say. I knew then that I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't laugh away. Something that could either ruin the fragile balance of my life or change it completely. And for the first time in years, I found myself hoping for change. The whispers started small, like the faint rustle of leaves before a storm. At first, I ignored them, neighbors' gossip about everything in this town. But when I walked into the corner store and felt the silence fall over the room, when I saw two women from down the street glance at Clara Bennett's house and then at me, I knew it wasn't in my head. They'd seen us together and in a place where stories spread faster than the wind. They didn't need facts to fuel them. One evening, I was out front trimming the hedge when Eleanor Wright, who has lived across the road since I was a boy, called over. "James Larson," she said, her voice thin but sharp. "You best be careful about the company you keep. Folks are starting to talk." She didn't need to say who. I felt my throat tighten. I gave a polite nod, muttered something about minding my own, and went inside before the weight of her meaning could settle on me. Inside, my mother was setting the table. She looked up, studying me the way only a mother can. "Is it true?" she asked. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it was steady, and it left no room for escape. I tried to deflect, but she pressed on. "You spend a lot of time with Clara Bennett. People notice." "I notice." I wanted to say it was nothing, that I was just being neighborly, that we shared coffee and small talk. Nothing more. But even as the words formed, they tasted like lies. My mother's eyes softened, but the furrow in her brow remained. "She's a good woman," she said quietly. "But this could get complicated for you, for her." Later that night, I found myself walking past Clara Bennett's house as though drawn by some invisible pull. She was on her porch, reading beneath the golden glow of her lamp. She looked up when she saw me, and instead of surprise, there was something like relief in her expression. "Come sit," she said, patting the chair beside her. I hesitated. "People are starting to talk," I admitted. Her smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Let them." She closed her book, set it aside, and leaned back. "James Larson, I've lived long enough to know people will always find something to whisper about. I stopped living by their approval a long time ago." Her words should have eased me, but instead they lit a fire of both fear and admiration. I sat beside her, close enough to smell the faint trace of lavender from her hair. We didn't speak for a while. The quiet was comfortable, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of a car passing down the street. Finally, she turned to me, her gaze steady through the thin rims of her glasses. "Do you regret what you said the other day?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I thought of the coffee, the silence, the weight of my joke that wasn't really a joke. I opened my mouth, then closed it, fumbling for words. "I don't know," I said at last. It was foolish, but it was honest. Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but something softer. She reached for her mug, then paused, her fingers resting against the handle. "Honesty is rare and dangerous, but sometimes it's worth the risk." I felt the night wrap around us, heavy with meaning. I wanted to reach for her hand, to cross the small distance that felt larger than any fence or rumor. But instead, I stayed still, locked in the fragile balance between longing and restraint. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the steps. Her hand brushed mine as I said good night. It was the lightest touch, yet it carried the weight of everything unspoken between us. As I walked home under the streetlights, I realized the gossip no longer scared me as much as the thought of losing whatever this was becoming. The whispers might grow louder, the looks might sharpen, but for the first time in years, I felt something stronger than fear. And that something was her. Rain has a way of stripping the world bare, peeling back the noise until only the truth remains. That afternoon, the sky opened up without warning. I was caught on my porch, watching the sheets of water blur the street lights into smears of gold and silver. Across the way, Clara Bennett's house glowed dimly through the downpour. Then I saw her silhouette at the window, still almost fragile. Before I knew it, I was running across the street, rain soaking through my shirt, my shoes slapping the pavement. She opened the door before I could knock, as if she had been waiting. Her hair was loose, damp at the ends, and her glasses fogged from the sudden change in air. "You'll catch a cold," she murmured, ushering me inside. I stood dripping in her hallway, my heart pounding harder than the storm outside. We sat in her living room, the rain drumming against the roof. She handed me a towel, then settled into the armchair across from me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The quiet was heavy, but not empty. It was as if the storm had cornered us, demanding honesty. Finally, she said, "You know, people used to say the same things when I married my husband, that I was too young, that it wouldn't last." Her eyes were on the window, but her voice carried me somewhere else entirely. They were wrong. We had 17 good years before the sickness came. 17 years I wouldn't trade for anything. I shifted, unsure whether to speak, but she went on. "When he died, I thought the world ended with him. And in a way, it did. I learned how to be alone. I told myself that was enough." She paused, her gaze finally meeting mine. "But lately, I'm not so sure anymore. The room felt smaller than the air thicker. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. Clara Bennett. My throat tightened. I never meant for my words to complicate things, but I can't pretend anymore. You matter to me. Her lips parted, and for a second I thought she might laugh or push me away. Instead, she rose and crossed the room. Her steps slow, deliberate. She stopped just in front of me, close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes. The way the rain had curled a strand of her hair. You shouldn't say things you don't mean, she whispered. I mean them, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She closed her eyes as if absorbing the weight of that truth. When she opened them, something softer, almost vulnerable, flickered there. She lowered herself onto the couch beside me, and for a long moment we sat in silence, the storm filling the space our words couldn't. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned forward until her forehead rested against mine. The world fell away. No gossip, no disapproving looks, no fear, just the steady rhythm of rain and the fragile warmth of her touch. I didn't move, afraid that even the smallest shift would break the spell. When she finally pulled back, there was a sheen in her eyes. This is dangerous, she murmured. For both of us, I know, I said, but I don't care. Her hand brushed mine, trembling. But sure, you should care, because once people know, they won't let it be simple. They never do. Her words hung between us, heavy and true. But even as she warned me, her fingers lingered against mine, refusing to let go. When I left her house that night, the storm had eased to a soft drizzle. I walked home soaked to the bone, yet burning inside, every step echoing with the truth I could no longer bury. I knew the whispers would only grow louder, that the world outside her walls would not understand. But as the rain tapered off and the night grew still, one thing had never felt clearer. I was already too far in to turn back. By the time summer reached its end, the whispers had sharpened into words no one bothered to lower their voices for. At the store, I'd catch fragments. My name, hers, the word foolish hanging in the air like smoke. Even my mother grew quieter around me, her silence more pointed than questions could ever be. But the truth was out now, whether spoken or not. I wasn't just the neighbor helping with fences or carrying boxes anymore. I was the man who had let his heart cross a line. One evening, I stood by the fence I'd once painted for her. The boards had dried to a soft chestnut, sturdy and new. Funny how it could change with just a coat of paint. How something weathered could look reborn. Clara Bennett came out onto her porch, her eyes catching mine in the golden dusk. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she stepped down, walking toward me with that calm stride that always seemed to slow the world around her. They're talking more, I admitted when she reached me. She sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Let them. They don't live our lives, James Larson. I looked at her, then really looked and saw the weight she carried in the set of her shoulders. For all her strength, she wasn't untouched by the rumors. She was just braver than I was at showing it. I swallowed hard. Tell me honestly, do you regret this? Any of it? Her answer was quiet but firm. No, not once. She reached out, her hand covering mine on the fence rail. But I need to know if you can carry this with me, because if you can't, I'd rather we stop before it breaks us both. Her words cut straight through me. I thought of the long nights staring at my ceiling, the tension with my mother, the way Henry smirked when he passed us on the street. But I also thought of her laughter, rare but real, and the light in her eyes when she let her guard slip. I thought of how alive I felt every time I walked up her steps. I tightened my grip on her hand. I don't want to stop. Whatever comes, I'd rather face it with you than go back to the emptiness I had before. For the first time in weeks, her smile reached her eyes. It wasn't wide, but it was true. She squeezed my hand, then let go, stepping back as though giving both of us room to breathe. That night, we sat together on her porch. No secrets, no dodging glances, just two people watching the sky shift from gold to deep blue. Listening to the cicadas hum, she told me more about her husband, about the life she'd built and lost. And for the first time, she spoke not with sorrow, but with gratitude. I listened, realizing that love wasn't about replacing what had been, but daring to begin again despite the cracks. When I finally rose to leave, she walked me to the fence. The air was cool, the stars beginning to prick the sky. I turned to her, words pressing against my chest. Clara Bennett, if things were different, if time had been kinder, I would have asked you to marry me. Her eyes softened, glistening in the starlight. She didn't laugh, didn't dismiss it. She only whispered, maybe time doesn't decide everything. Maybe we do. I carried those words with me across the yard, into my quiet house, into the uncertain days ahead. The world might never approve, the whispers might never fade. But standing there by that painted fence, I knew the choice was ours to make. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of choosing.